Hey.
Hey, what's up?
So the thing that you sent me, it was sent to my cell phone, but I'm trying to do this from like my Mac.
Oh, gotcha. I can send it via email.
Okay, perfect. That'll fix it.
Great. I'll shoot that over. Cool.
And the Destiny New Feminist one.
Okay. Whichever one is the one that we've been communicating with is the one I will use.
I'm assuming it's that.
Okay. You.
Okay, cool. I'll hop on.
Okay.
Okay.
Hey.
What's up?
You got real jazzed up for this.
I thought it would be really funny if I just showed up with like
a fedora.
Sunglasses, you know? Like, how seriously can you take me if I'm dressed like this, you know?
More seriously. Like a Hollywood molester. I'm a big fan.
What's up, yo? Yeah, that's
campaign
scary.
ready to happen.
I know. What's going on in your life?
Not a lot. What's going on in your life?
My life? I'm like stressing out. I'm stressing out. It's okay. I'm gonna take this off.
The costume comes off. See, I told you, you're a molester. You're getting comfortable already. You have a button on
Whoa,
your desk.
whoa. Just taking off the jacket. It's like 86 degrees in here. It's crazy. Can't wear a hat inside when it's Texas and it's like the AC is already struggling so hard.
What are you thinking? So why are you so stressed out?
Oh, I think that like the just planning the summit, getting Catholic Creatives sort of ready to getting ready to make some big sort of changes with it, and moving. Me and Marcelino basically like letting it go a little bit and having an executive director that's like running it. This is like super secret, so you know.
But not having control, that's hard when it's your baby.
Yeah. So that's what's up. How's life on your end? What's going on with you?
Good, busy, a lot of travel, but fun places, so it's good.
Yeah, you're like all over the place. I've been enjoying seeing, you know, the purple hair cropping up on the news feed all over the place. You're
Flat Stanley, the purple hair version that goes everywhere.
Right. You're yeah, definitely. How's being sober coming? What's that like?
Being sober is amazing. It's you know, I traveled the country for a few years not sober, and then now I get to travel it sober, and I'm like, this is a beautiful place. And it's like, oh yeah, you've been here before. You just you don't remember it too well.
Yeah. I think it's really hilarious that you're like, Anthony, like, are we gonna do this again? Like,
we have to do it again. I'm really a perfectionist, and the thing is, I do so many podcasts and interviews, and I've gotten to the point where I'm like on autopilot with you know, the messaging and staying on messaging, and then after the fact, once I realized what you really wanted, like this kind of like behind the scenes, like what it is to be an activist and doing this stuff and the organizing and all of that, I was like, holy crap, there's so much to talk about there. And it's such an interesting topic, but it's not something people ever ask me about or really want to know about. So I'm glad you're giving me a second chance.
I just think it's funny that you were like, you know, feeling, I guess, like you had failed or something the whole time. Like it was.
Oh, no, I did fail. I for sure failed. Let's get on the same page about that. That was never fail. And yeah, I this is all a facade. This whole like laid back, I just do whatever. It's bullshit. Like it's not reality at all. I want good content if my name is tied to it, you definitely didn't get that last
time. Yeah. Well, either way, I think that like our podcast is like, you know, way lower on the spectrum of like Destiny's. I don't know, like we're only getting like 600, 900 people, like whatever. It's not a huge.
It doesn't matter. You're getting super cool people. Yeah, like I actually think this is much higher on, you know, my scale of talks that I do and stuff, because it's people who I feel like are kind of our tribe, right? Like they're creative, they're people who are activists and really trying to change the culture. So I think these are the most important people.
That's a really great thing to say.
I mean, not you. You're
not recording yet.
So you're excluded from that. Don't take it to your head.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So, are there any things that you were like, this would be a really great softball question to ask me so that I can actually like say the stuff that I've been thinking about? Anything like that?
No, don't do that. Do the exact opposite of that this time. Like, nothing pre-prepared, just off the top of my head.
I think it's like one of my favorite challenges is like breaking like Catholic celebrities or just like speakers out of their normal shtick, because the normal shtick is just so like, I think it's boring. But everybody's got, I mean, did you listen to my Christopher West interview by any chance?
No.
Oh, it's just
weird stuff.
A really great example of like somebody who's his shtick has been like his shtick for like 20 years. So getting him off the tracks, it took like a half an hour to like get out of that mode. But
that's awesome though. So a friend and I were actually planning on doing a podcast, and the whole idea, it was called Turn Down Your Stereotype. And so it was to take like something we would be totally shocked about that's completely against your stereotype of who you are, that humanizes you to some degree with people on the other side, like what would it be? And the idea is that then people become human, because I think, yeah, when you're doing the shtick, people already know that, and they know that they're all kind of polished, like practiced answers. But then when you have something completely out of left field that's like, oh, nobody's asked me that before, this is my everyday life, this is whatever, it humanizes.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's like it's a great place to start. If people have a stereotype of you, what's the thing that breaks it, other than being pro-life and feminist? Obviously, that's like, that's plastered everywhere. People know that now. What's the real secret?
The real secret. I think a lot of people see me. My husband actually told me this weekend, because I spoke at a conference, and he's like, you just seem so cool and laid back, and like you're just having a conversation with people. And I'm like, that's so far from the truth. I obsess compulsively before and after every single talk. Like, I keep myself up at night with like, damn it, I should have said that, or I should have said this. So I think there's like this composed demeanor that I don't even realize I put off. I'm so glad I do, because I hate when I listen to speakers and they're like crazy nervous, because then I get really nervous for them, right? Like you get super uncomfortable because they're uncomfortable. And so I've always tried to overcompensate, but probably too much, where I'm almost like, I remember one time I actually did a talk back in my drinking days, and I was hungover, and I was wearing like a baseball cap and sweatpants, and I showed up to this pretty big conference, and my friend's like, you look like one of those asshole Hollywood directors that like doesn't give a crap. And I was like, maybe that can be my thing then, whatever, like I'll embrace it. No, I think that there's this very deep wounded brokenness in me that's really hard. It makes me hate public speaking quite a bit, actually, even though that's what I do all the time. And so some force
will be living.
Yeah, I mean, some force in the universe is like, oh, you hate flying and public speaking? Guess what you're going to do for the rest of your life now? And it gets me out of that comfort zone. But, okay, I don't know that anyone outside of my real family like knows this. I suck my finger like a child when I sleep. Like, I'm a 34-year-old woman. And when I was little, my mom would put this like disgusting nail polish on, trying to get me to stop like the nail biter nail polish. She had like a finger splint for me, like all this stuff. And the other day I was like dozing off, and it's usually only when I'm sleepy. And so I'm kind of sucking on my finger, and I rub literally like a baby. I sit and rub my nose, and I thought, if somebody just got like a picture of this and it was like, this is the chick that you were taking seriously a few hours ago, like it would be the end of me. But now I'm outing myself. So
yeah, now you did. One of my favorite priests, Father Don Fisher, he's like the chaplain of the Catholic Creatives kind of world. And after every like time he says grace, when he's around new people, he was like, how was that? Do you guys think that was a good grace? Like he outs his own sort of insecurity each time, just to like make fun of it.
I'll start doing that. That's genius. Did I do good today?
Yeah.
Did I exist in this world a day longer with your approval?
Right. No, and I think it's a really I can see how he's using humor to like make fun of his own, because that's a real thing that he's thinking, so then he just turns it into a joke, but it's like half joke, And
but don't you think most people think that?
Right. Exactly.
You think okay.
So I just think it's really like a I don't know, it's for me, definitely, like I can level with you in that whole sort of polished thing. Like we just went to the Napa Institute, which is, have you heard of the Napa Institute?
No.
Like all of the pro-life, like David Dallin was there, Kate Bryan, like there's a lot of different people that are in the Catholic sort of pro-life world that end up showing up, Lila Rose. Anyway, it's where a lot of the wealthy Catholic people go, and then all of the people that want their money
cool.
And can afford like spending $3,000 on a weekend at a resort to like hobnob with these people. Anyway, Marcellino and I showed up there, and it's totally about peacocking, right? Like everybody is feathers up, hardcore. And Marcellino and I, two things that you have to know for context for this. One, I am not the person that ends up really flourishing at one of these events where there's a lot of baby boomers that care about politics and culture wars. That's not my shtick. The second thing is, in order to sort of feel confident, Marcellino and I decided that we were going to buy the same suits and wear exactly the same suits every day and dress like twins, just to be like, a little bit rebellious, you know, with lots of floral patterns and just like looking as flamboyantly as possible. So this is how I show up. And just imagine like your normal DC sort of like a lot of people who want to give to lawyers or schools and their development officers, you know, having breakfast in a beautiful courtyard with breakfast being served that's like all this fresh fruit and olive trees around. And it's like, this is high school, right? Like, okay, cafeteria, where am I going to sit for lunch? Like all of my insecurities are just like firing hard. So I'm like, I'm gonna fight against that. I'm gonna go and sit down. I see this like group of like women. It's like beautiful women, all dressed to the nines, and no guys there. And I'm like, I'm gonna like I'm gonna go and sit there. So I like walk over and I put my hand out. I'm like, hey, is this like the Power Woman's table? You know, like you shaking hands, and then
I'm a Power Woman. I belong here.
Yeah. And I want to meet them anyway. As I like go out to shake the first person's hand, a bird flies over and shits on my arm.
That is the best story I've ever heard in my life.
Isn't that amazing?
That's like, exactly what should have happened to take this story up a notch. That's amazing.
It's literally.
At least it didn't shit on her. Were you like, that could have been you, I saved you?
No. Like, I got shit on.
You legit got shit on. Did everyone laugh? How did they react?
No. It was complete silence. Like, totally, everyone. I mean, all of us were awkward. Like, I think they were awkward.
What a lost opportunity! That should have been hilarious.
It was hilarious. Like, we all looked at each other for a second, and like one of them was like, "Are you gonna wash that off?" And I was like, "Yeah, I guess so." I got up and left. But the point being, that was really awkward. But rather than like holding that in, I just started to tell that story as part of my like, you know, what's something funny that's happened to you at Napa so far. And it turned into a strength because people thought it was hilarious. So
it's totally hilarious. I love that y'all wore matching suits, because then if one of you does something stupid, the effect ripples out because it's going to affect the other one as well.
That's
Did
how
you
the
think
twin
that
thing
part
works.
through?
Yeah, it's the story of me and Marcelina's life.
Yeah, okay, so then everyone just assumed he got shit on as well. Like, you got to share that burden together.
Yeah, as long as people are able to differentiate, like they can separate. But that everything that happens, like the impression from one goes to the other. And I could tell more stories about that. But this is about you, Destiny. So I want to get back.
A twin, but maybe I'll start saying that I do. Anytime I do something stupid or get shit on, I'll be like, oh, that was Stephanie. That was or Bethany, our triplet. That was who that wasn't me. I'm way too cool to ever be shit on. Or that story I think I told you where I was being interviewed by Vice and the acorn hit me in the face.
Yeah, I want to hear about that. It
was something where it was just this moment of me being forced out of this self-loathing for a split second because I'm being interviewed by Vice and getting all this attention. It's this huge deal. And this busload of kids go by and somebody on the bus is like, I love you, Destiny. And I'm like, nobody knows my name. But now all of a sudden, because my group was removed from the Women's March for our pro-life views, like now people suddenly know who I am. Right. And so when this kid screamed it out, I was like, gross. Like I yelled back, gross, without even realizing, oh, I've got Vice News sitting here filming me. And I was like, get better heroes. Like that's what they said. They said, Destiny, you're my hero. So I was like, get better heroes. And then the interviewer said, like, is this weird for you? And I was like, it's totally weird for me. Like, I love pro-life feminism getting the attention. I hate Destiny getting the attention. Like I hate the fact that I have to be the conduit, but nobody else is going to do it. So I have to. And then right at that moment, like we're kind of laughing and this huge acorn comes falling out of the tree and hits me square in my front tooth. And I'm just like, all right, this is how the universe constantly keeps me humble because that's where I need to be. Like I would be a tyrant if I was someone who had like the least bit of self-esteem. Like it would be bad for everybody involved.
I don't think that's true. I think tyrants have very low self-esteem that are compensating really hard.
Okay, well, that's true too. It's good to have that middle ground. You're a hero, get whacked in the teeth. Like Vice News has B-roll of me getting hit in the teeth if they ever really want to destroy me in some sort of piece. Just turn that into like a GIF over and over.
So I definitely want to hear more about like the experience of being thrust into like public life as someone who has secret insecurities and sucks her thumb at night. in seriousness though, there's this sense of, I don't know, we're kind of all like, we're all insecure underneath. And there's, at least for me, whenever I started to experience a little bit of that, it elevates, it like turns up the knob on all of your insecurities, like the more eyes that are on you, right? So like every time that you go out to speak, the bigger the crowds get, like that just must like turn up the volume on all of those inner voices that are just like, hey, perform, 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 be accepted, you know?
Yeah, totally. I think for me, it doesn't matter if the crowd is, 15 people. 15 people is my max embarrassment. That's if 15 people go home at the end of the night and are like, she had a booger hanging out of her nose, like I don't exist anymore. Like I'm done at that point. So even anything beyond that, I found I can handle. I spoke in Dublin recently in front of 120,000 people, and that should have been scary, but I was like, no, I really am almost kind of more scared in just little quiet college classrooms where you can hear a pin drop. And the whole thing is like, I know I'm supposed to be an activist and be talking about important stuff, but really at the end of the day, that wanting to build my self-confidence comes down to getting laughs. Like I really want to be funny and I want people to think that I'm really funny. And so I don't count how much I've changed anyone's views on the stuff I'm supposed to care about for newsletters. I care more like how many big laughs did I get? And this weekend I was speaking at a conference and it was an older crowd and I said the word douchebag and I got a couple chuckles, but like not like my normal, that's one of my college jokes that gets a lot of chuckles. And so then finally I ended up saving it by the end and there was like full uproarious laughter. And I was like, you did good today, pig. Like it was just one of those things where like I suddenly felt validated. But I was really kind of, okay, how could I have made that douchebag joke funnier? Like what can I do next time if I have, this age audience? And I think a lot of times also when I speak at colleges, like they're in an academic setting. And so they don't know that they can laugh. And the first time I drop a swear word, they're like, oh, are you supposed to be, who are you? Why are you talking to us? And breaking people out of that mindset that this is that I am professional. I'm not professional at all. I put a blazer on sometimes and I pretend to be professional for like an hour, but it's all a joke. I really want people to see that I'm human because I think that's, once you have that human connection, you can laugh and you can empathize, and it makes all of us a better person when we share in that moment together.
Yeah, so the desire to be like accepted, like for someone like yourself who has sort of decided to really commit to being someone that breaks a lot of boxes. There's also this sense of, am I going to be accepted when I break down those walls? Like you're definitely a bit of a misfit, and in some ways it's like really working for you right now. But I'm sure that like in the past, there was a little bit of a sense of like, I don't know where I fit, Is that did that have its genesis for you in high school? Or
yeah, no, earlier than that, it was like elementary school and junior high. I was a really big nerd. And that's what, like, I carried that along with me. My mom used to go, she traveled all the time. She was a single mom. And so whenever she would go to these different places, she would bring me back shirts. And I think the very first shirt she brought me back was like tie-dye, and I loved it and wore it like all week. So after that, that became a thing. She would bring me back these like tie-dye shirts, and I thought they were the coolest. And it would be like San Diego or Chicago. And so I remember wearing them like every single day to 6th grade, like a different tie-dye shirt. And this kid started calling me Protest Destiny because I guess he thought that, like, I don't know, like I was some hippie and I was protesting the Vietnam War or something. And I remember being so embarrassed by that and being like, I'm never wearing like a tie-dye shirt again. And I look back now and think that's so stupid. But of course I have kids that same age. So I think it's kind of helped me understand more that mentality that, like, that's not even an insulting name. Like, my daughter just dyed her hair red and the kids started calling her Wendy from like Wendy's. And I'm like, that's not a bad thing. Like, there's a lot of things that are red that they could be making fun of you for, but that's not even a bad one. But I remember that feeling of like Protest Destiny being this really embarrassing thing for me. And then throughout high school, rather than being excluded, I just kind of decided, like, I'll be a loner. Like, I'll hang out with the misfits. And that worked for me too, to some degree. So once I got into my 20s and started doing New Wave Feminist, and I have an unpopular opinion for everyone. Like, take your pick. If you're pro-life, cool, you're probably going to hate the feminist side. If you're feminist, you're going to hate the pro-life side. If you're any of these, you might disagree with my consistent life ethic belief, which is that, you know, I'm anti-war, death penalty, torture, and abortion. So I have myriad things that people can hate on me and disagree with me about. And that was kind of a baptism by fire that I needed. It was like a very cleansing thing. Like, I will not make everyone happy. I will actually infuriate so many people. And once you get to that level, I think you stop caring quite as much. When everything happened with the Women's March and we got so much media attention, I probably did 200 interviews in like a 2-week period. I very intentionally did not read any comments on anything. Right. And people come to the New Wave Feminist page and they'll comment on stuff and I'll read them. But every day I've got like this fill line. And as soon as I'm, you know, getting short with my husband or snapping at my kids because of crap that the internet's making me feel, I'm like, no more internet today. That's an easy solution. Just cut it off and don't look at it. And luckily, that's balanced out by enough people who come to me and say, you said something I really needed to hear. And then that suddenly makes it all worth it. But again, I mean, I think most people have experienced this. It takes about 10 of those people to silence one of the people who corrected your spelling in something or, you know, said your idea was stupid. Like, it's a struggle. It's a blessing and a curse, though, because, again, I think humility, especially in leaders, is vital, and we don't see enough of it. And so I don't ever want to be closed off to that. Like, I want to stay raw to it. Like, I think it helps keep me honest and human in a lot of ways, you know?
Mm-hmm. For sure. So I want to go back to, like, kind of the genesis, though, the genesis story of Destiny. And we've kind of talked a little bit about this, but, like, the whole sort of committing to being a misfit and being a loner in high school, like there was a lot kind of going on with you at that point that I think in a lot of ways has led to the commitment to being a misfit as an adult in a way, with like all of your opinions and your freaking purple hair, you know? So just paint me a picture of like your life growing up and what that was like.
Yeah, so my mom got pregnant with me when she was 19. She was in college and ended up moving home, and my grandparents were ministers, and so we lived with them off and on, and you know, kind of had, it was a dichotomy in and of itself, because we were supposed to be in this religious family that followed this certain set of standards and rules. But then, you know, my mom had a couple failed marriages and I was kind of moved around a lot, and it didn't add up with how I felt like we were supposed to be, you know? And it definitely ended up having an effect on me for sure. You know, kind of this revolving door of stepdads. And even though it didn't have much to do with me, it's really hard not to take that personally as a kid, you know, that I wasn't enough to keep any of these men around to be like a father to me, really. It was funny, one of my stepdads recently, like a couple of years ago, he was on Facebook and he friended me on Facebook, and I'm like, this is bizarre. And so we started playing like Words with Friends together competitively. And so I'm like, you know, I'm not going to set any parameters. It's strange. And then I think he got engaged and he unfriended me and blocked me on Facebook, which I'm like, how random is that? But dude, you already left me and rejected me at 13, like at a very vital time in my life. You don't get to come block me on Facebook after that. Like, as a grown ass woman, I was like, there's still some wounds there, you know? Right. There's some stuff that I think I hadn't really dealt with. And luckily I have an amazing husband, and he's been able to kind of help me heal a lot of those things. But there's parts of me that that will never be healed because of this kind of relationship that I've had with men. And I have to be really careful not to become this man hater feminist, but I fully acknowledge that a part of me is a man-made feminist. I've seen guys lack in a lot of areas, and it has also been able to show me the strength of women in those same situations, but it hurts you. It has this like residual effect. So going back to the genesis of Destiny and that type of thing, I think, you know, when I was 15, I started dating a guy who was a football player and he was really popular. And
oh, nice.
Yeah.
You're like punk dating the football player, eh?
Exactly.
You're like making
and
it.
I think that was the thing. It was like, oh, this will piss off my mom and my friends. And so he like dated me, and a really sweet guy. Like we're friends to this day. But I remember going to a party, like a house party that I had no business being at, because it was him and all his friends. And this girl who was friends with him actually walked up to me and gave me a bowl of dog food. And she was like, here, we got this for you. And okay, Destiny now would be like, slap that crap out of her hand, and I would have pulled her off. But 15-year-old Destiny like ran out the front door and just went and cried in some bushes till my mom picked me up. Like it was really horrible. Okay, so but then to the whole like weird way Facebook does stuff, this girl found me a few years ago and was like, I am so amazed by what you're doing in the pro-life movement. I went off to college. I ended up having an abortion and I really regret it. And it's just really messed me up. And I think what you're doing is so powerful. And I'm just like, can you say sorry for giving me dog food, please? I want to like you so bad, right? So I don't know. I do think stuff like that comes full circle. And again, as a grown-up now, being able to have like a fully developed frontal cortex and look back on these things logically and say like, hurt people. And whether it was a stepdad or a mean girl in high school, like so often that's where that stuff comes from. And that helps me take it a little less personally. Yeah.
There's like a really fine line there, you know, where sometimes that wound can drive you to, I mean, it does drive you to activism, right? Like that is what causes activism in people, to see injustice and pain and say, I'm going to do something about this. But like at the same time, stepping out of that sense of like, hey, I don't belong, and there's other people that feel this way too. Like this needs to be different. There's also this like, there's also this energy that can be really like dark when you're living in that voice. Which is something that I've felt a lot with Catholic Creatives, just being like a activist in a way for the creative sort of, I don't know, the creative remnant of the church, all the youths. And I don't know, I'm just wondering how you deal with that, like moving from being in, you know, high school to like starting New Wave Feminists and like committing in a small way to just being like a voice for a remnant that doesn't really have a voice. How do you deal with walking that line?
You know, I agree. I think that someone actually pointed out to me, we recently did a pro-life feminist film like documentary, and the woman who shot the film came up to me afterwards and she said, you know, you created the hero that you needed back in high school. And I thought that was really interesting because of course I did end up facing my own teen pregnancy at 16. And luckily I had my mom to look to as someone who had experienced this herself, but I was so mad at myself for repeating this cycle. And there was also that fear that I would repeat the next 10 years of her life too and have failed marriages and, you know, this pain and unhappiness. And so I think because of that, I had to break out of that and say, I have to create a movement where people like me do feel welcome. And I did have, you know, this empathy for the underdog. And I guess I've always kind of felt that way. I joke and I tell my kids now, like they will all work in the service industry at some point because I think it's the most like soul growing thing you can ever do is be treated like crap by people who think you're like not worthy because you're serving them, right? And it makes you treat other people better. To this day, my husband's horrified by how much I tip like really bad service. It doesn't matter. I'm like, maybe they're having a bad day. You don't know their life. Like it just gives you this understanding for others. But I think for me, once I started being more vocal about my crazy weird beliefs that I thought were very extreme and nobody else would agree with, and then I started seeing like, you know, 2, 3, 4 people come along and say, I have thought that same thing. I haven't been able to put it into words. And, you know, another kind of part of my story is I'm dyslexic. And so growing up, like reading was always a struggle to me. And in a lot of ways, I overcompensated for that difficulty by just being, I guess, extra when it comes to communication. And obviously you can tell I talk a ton and I talk to people a ton and I collect words and I collect stories and all this like on an oratory level. And so once I started doing that and finding ways to express myself, you know, not just in the written word, but actually, you know, talking to people and saying, this is this thought I have, this is this idea I have, and let me flesh it out. And just having these conversations with people, they all became very consistent and kind of common sense. And then I would say them and people were like, oh, I've been so frustrated. I've been trying to think of exactly the way to word it. And you word it the exact way that I've been feeling. And suddenly this tribe starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then that gave me the confidence and the boldness to say, okay, maybe we're onto something. Like, we can't all be that wrong, you know, like odds are there's some truth in the things we're saying. And then, you know, I think the next big break kind of came being in the pro-life movement, wanting to be accepted by the traditional pro-lifers and realizing that was never going to happen. Like, it's just not, yeah. So after everything that happened with the Women's March, like I said, did 200 interviews, and I'm being asked by all these publications to talk about my experience. Not one person.
Cool
huh?
No, you're the cool kid.
No. That's not what happened. Not one person in the pro-life movement asked me to speak at any of their events that year for the March for Life.
Freaking classic.
I mean, well, I was a never Trumper. I tend to say the F word a bunch. Like, I didn't fit their mold at all, and they didn't like that. And so there was this moment where I was actually standing in front of the Supreme Court at the end of the March for Life, and we were listening to these students get up and talk. A group had organized it, and this like 18-year-old dude stands up and he starts talking about my story. And he's like, they even kicked our women out of the Women's March. And I was like, hell nah. Like, it's one thing if you're going to ignore what happened to me, like, cool, fine, whatever. But don't tell my story when I'm literally right here and I could be telling it. Like, but nobody wants the me part of the story, right? And so I remember telling the group I was with, I'm going to start the March for Pizza, which is what we do after the March for Life. We do a March for Pizza. I was like, I'm starting the March for Pizza. I'll talk to you later. I don't want to see, you know, any more of these talks. And as I'm walking down the street, someone from the New York Times called and they said, hey, do you have a minute for an interview? And I was like, I've got all the time in the world. I have all the time in the world. Yes, New York Times, let me do an interview with you. And kind of realizing right then that that's my audience anyway. My audience isn't the pro-life movement. I'm not going to make them more pro-life. They're already there. They already get it. Like, I've been given a gift to speak to people outside of the movement in their language and, you know, in the same kind of conceptual way that they see things. And so in that sense, the pro-life movement kind of making me this black sheep and kicking me out a little bit was the best freaking thing that ever happened, because it forced me to redirect my focus where I think it was always supposed to be. Like, I think that there's a purpose for my life that isn't just sitting around with the cool kids in the pro-life movement, but instead being a misfit in the pro-choice movement, but still being close enough where I can actually have dialogue with people on the other side, which we don't see a lot of that happening right now within these, you know, movements that have really segregated themselves so much and polarized and dehumanized the other side.
One's like a moment that you can point at where, like, so obviously that's like a really painful moment, even if you're not going to like say, oh yeah, that hurt. But there's like a sense of rejection that comes when you're like, hey, I want to be accepted, you know, like I've been working really hard, like, you know, give me the respect. And it doesn't come. Like, there's you were saying, yeah, this is a real gift. That pain or that rejection, it was still a real gift because it sort of put you into the right place. In a lot of ways, that probably would have been the worst thing in the world for you to like get accepted in the pro-life world, and sort of like pulling you in to conform to that. You needed to be different. But there's also this like, how do you actually deal with that spiritually, like behind the scenes, whenever like no one is watching you? How do you get to the point where you can like, I don't know, see it and feel it as a positive thing? So I guess just like give me a moment where there was that sort of sense of pain and you actually like really had to make a decision, or you had an experience that sort of reframed it for you.
Yeah, I mean, well, I would say for years, that's what led to my alcoholism. You know, it was this idea that I didn't fit in, and having this kind of low simmering boil of just like, you don't belong here, you're a fraud. You know, that's the thing that was always in my head. You're a fraud. You have no right to tell other people anything. And so I numbed that with alcohol all the time. And even as the Women's March was happening, you know, I had been heavily drinking kind of pre that. And then I remember as soon as everything happened in that 2-week span where we did the Women's March and the March for Life, and I did all these interviews, like the desire to drink totally dissipated. Like it was gone. I wanted to be sharp and clear and present and make sure that I was, you know, accounting for every single word that I said, because I knew even at the time, this is a monumental opportunity. Like we were alluded to on Saturday Night Live's Weekend Update, which was the most beautiful thing that ever happened to me in my life, because if I wasn't an activist, I would have tried comedy for sure. And so I always, like, in the back of my head was like, maybe one of my kids will grow up to be on Saturday Night Live. That would be so cool. And when I was sitting there and someone sent me the link at the airport to Michael Shea talking about, you know, pro-life women being kicked out of the Women's March, I just burst into tears because it was such a beautiful moment of like, I like Saturday Night Live, dude, like just reference something that I did. Like that was phenomenal. It was a highlight of my life. And I remember, so then after all that happened and I went back to my real life, like I started drinking again. But there was this part of me that had this moment of like, that can't be the solution to numb that feeling of insecurity. And that's what it did. You know, a lot of people say it's liquid courage, right? And it makes you brave. And it made me feel powerful, because as soon as I started drinking, all those insecurities, I didn't have to feel them. Like it silenced those voices. And I became way too dependent on that. But at the same time, once the Women's March happened and I had all these interviews and I just kept having to, you know, do my talking points and really solidify my views and what I stood for. And people completely on the other side started saying, all right, you know, I disagree with you, but I at least understand where you're coming from. Like getting that validation that I wasn't crazy and I wasn't a fraud and maybe I was onto something. I think that's what led to me not needing to drink during that 2 weeks. And so then, you know, it was probably about 6 months later and I looked back and I realized like, I'm literally jonesing for the time that I was sober for 2 weeks. Like how strange is that? But I couldn't stop drinking. Huh?
You were jonesing?
I was jonesing for sobriety. Like I kept looking back, like normally you're jonesing for alcohol. And here I am jonesing for when I was sober and thinking like, why can't I be that fulfilled all the time? Because during that 2 week period, I just felt like I was living on full throttle. Like I was pursuing my purpose 100% and doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And I didn't need some substance to help me. You know, I didn't need that crutch. And so I wanted to feel that alive again so that I wouldn't have this hindrance of alcohol in my life. And ironically, it ended up kind of working out backwards. I got into a recovery program that is anonymous, so you're not supposed to talk about it, for alcoholics. And then like that's a loophole. You're allowed to say it that way. And then I got sober and my brain started getting sharp and I became, you know, more energy and more ability to go out and do all these things and kind of like create more content through writing and videos and all this stuff that I was doing for New Wave Feminist. And then the opportunities started picking up to really engage and do more speaking and conferences. And so now, like, I seriously look at my life and think I couldn't even imagine being hungover for what I'm doing now. Like, I would be so miserable if that was still a part of my life. Like, I enjoy living on full throttle with purpose in every single day.
Right. There's like so many things that I want to talk about that, or like to respond with that. So I'm just going to throw whatever comes out and then you can like respond. But the first one is that I, like in my own life, for me, that sort of self-medication was always like of the more like, I don't know, acceptance from women and lust and like, you know, pornography, masturbation, all that stuff. And I can definitely say like there was a time when like I had really like lost faith. I'd gone through a really big breakup, and the sense of just not belonging and not being accepted and being alone was so like just intense that like I just felt like completely trapped, and was I think coming out of addiction, like one of the things that I've learned from that has been if I am not if I'm not like spiritually like healthy, my ability to like create and to intersect with like opportunities and to change the world, or like live in abundant like life, all of that's gone, just because of like how much is tied up internally in that I don't know, I guess just in the cage there. And I'm just wondering, like, how, in terms of your like spiritual journey and how you've sort of like launched out of that, like I know that there's been a lot of suffering with like a partner breakup and with like Trump being elected, and even going through a lot of doubt and like leaving your church and like not being sure about Christianity and kind of being agnostic. Like there's a lot going on internally that's sort of been a part of the growth of your organization and New Wave Feminists. So I want to hear a little bit about that. Like, how has your sobriety and spiritual kind of growth gone alongside it?
Tied in. Well, the funny thing is, yeah, I mean, I grew up in a religious home, and while my pro-life views never, I mean, they were always very based in science, there was still this part of me that definitely you feel like your purpose, like if we just came out of slime and we're animals, then I don't have a purpose. Everything you know, you become very nihilistic at that point. Like, what does any of it even matter? And I think for me personally, I've always known that there's something, which is why I say that, you know, I'm agnostic. I don't know what that something is. I see it reflected in the beauty in my children and kindness in strangers and all that other hippy dippy crap. Like, I know that there is some sort of, you know, force that has us here, and that I do feel that I actually interact with. Like, I get these kind of like tugs on my heart that I'm supposed to do something. And a lot of times I don't even know why I'm doing it, but every time that I'm obedient and I follow that kind of like prompting of the spirit, which is what a lot of Christians would consider it, like it always pays off. And so I actually, it was, I guess, July, I said out loud, like, I'm agnostic, and I fully expected, you know, like a lightning bolt to hit me, and then it didn't. And I was like, yeah. Like I'm agnostic. And within 1 month of that is when I got into AA. And the funny thing is, when you're in there, they say you have to have a higher power. Like there's no compromise on that. They even have I broke the anonymity. Okay. So anyway, I didn't say that. Anyway, so even in a particular book, in a particular recovery program,
everybody knows what you're talking about.
I know. But it's like one of their traditions is you're not supposed to talk about it on radio, media, or in print. Anyway, so in their book, they have a chapter called We Agnostics. And the whole thing is basically saying, believe in God, some sort of God, because when you are trapped in that prison, like you're talking about, you need to know that there's something on the other side that can help you out. And when you don't have that, and you're just, you know, depending on your own willpower to get you through it, like that's going to fail time and time again. And so they always say, like, you know, if the doorknob is your higher power, if the light bulb is your higher power, if your neighbor's higher power is your higher power, like, fine, go with that. And so my sponsor said, okay, take out a piece of paper, write down everything God is to you. And she said, not what you've been taught in church or any type of like traditional learnings you have about it, but like, what have you seen manifest in your life that you would call God? And as I started writing this out and just realizing, like, again, there's this pattern of something that tells me to, you should look into that. You should do that. And a lot of times I won't even know why. It'll be something completely obscure that has nothing to do with, you know, New Wave Feminist or what I would determine as my mission. And then months down the road, I find out, like, oh, the skill that I gained through this thing that I did ends up being something I needed perfectly, like this equipping that I needed for New Wave Feminist. And so it's gotten to the point now where it's like, I don't even question it. If I'm supposed to go like volunteer at a food pantry, I don't know why, but I'll go do it. I had a lot of stuff before the Women's March where I was obedient to lead this grief group up at Watermark here in Dallas, and I felt completely inadequate doing it. It was, I lost my brother when I was 21, and we were very, very close. And so when he passed away, it was just this traumatic hellhole that I was in for about 6 years. I was suicidal. And at that point, I kind of completely cut off my grief and just stuffed it down and poured a bunch of booze on top of it and didn't deal with it. And then when I found the Grief Share Ministry that actually like walks you through the process of really handling and managing grief in a healthy way, it was a lifesaver to me. And so went through that and then felt led to lead it. And my very first semester semester I led it, it was a group of widows, like who had all been married 92 years. And I'm sitting here like talking about sibling loss, which I think is unique in the sense that it's just a different type of loss, but it's also downgraded by our culture a lot that, you know, oh, it's not your child or your spouse or even your parents, it's just your sibling. And since most people want to kill their siblings, like they don't give us a lot of credit when we actually do sibling, you know?
Yeah.
And so I felt so inadequate, but then I found like even in that moment, I was really equipped. And just being in these groups of women, and when a woman is rambling about the loss of a spouse and you know you have to cut her off because she's monopolizing the entire group, it's really, really hard to do. And you have to start doing this very gentle, like, that is such an excellent point, Ruth. Thank you so much for saying that. Debbie, didn't you have something similar happen with your husband? And like, you just learned this bizarre skill where you're able to do that. And so a couple months after I led a couple semesters of this group, actually, I got a call to be interviewed for a pro-life TV show. And I decided to go in for the interview. Father Frank Pavone was supposed to be there. He missed his flight, which even that I look back and I'm like, that's that higher power I have, which I've decided I call it Mr. Miyagi because it's that whole like wax on, wax off type, you know, why am I doing this? What does this have to do with karate? And the next thing you know, like, you know, karate and stuff because you waxed a fence or whatever. And so that's how my higher power works. So this day, Father Frank just happened to miss his flight, which I think was divine intervention on some level. And they said, can you take his seat at the table? Like, you don't have to say anything, which maybe they didn't know me very well, but of course I'm going to end up saying something. And they're doing an interview. The main guy who runs the show completely forgot he had a phone guest on. Like, I can tell. And I'm watching that thing happen in his eyes that I had seen happen in so many rambling widows' eyes where like, he's just like, someone please cut me off. Like, I just am not going to quit talking. Because when you're on TV, you can't have dead airtime. And I recognized it in him. And so I was like, Mark, that's an amazing point. Hey, Steve, weren't you saying something like that? And then immediately he's like, oh, crap. Yeah, we have a phone guest. Had I not done Grief Share, I wouldn't have been able to successfully be on this TV show, which, by the way, right after that interview, quote unquote, he offered me a job and I was on the show for another like year and a half. By that point, I'm used to cameras and lights and, you know, doing mic checks and all these other things that then once I was thrust into the spotlight after the Women's March, I was totally prepared for. But if I looked back, you know, when someone told me like 5 years prior to that, hey, one day you're going to be, you know, on PBS NewsHour, like, or doing NPR, All Things Considered, I would have been scared shitless all of those years thinking like, I am so unworthy. There's no way I'd be capable of doing that. But this higher power came along and made sure to like gently equip me and prepare me in the ways I needed to be, which is why I say I'm agnostic. I could never go full atheist. I think there's a lot of like arrogance in being able to say like, there is no God. Like, we couldn't have pictured Learjets 100 years ago with our stupid human pea brain. So like, how can we know that there's no God, right? But I don't know who God is. I just know that I'm very in tune with whatever my higher power is.
Yeah. There's almost a sense like in the last season of your life, there's just been this complete like pulling away of like false identities and of things that have, I don't know, perhaps not just, they just haven't been true like to who you are. And part of that being like participation in faith. Like, one of the reasons why I want to talk about this is because I think most people who are creative and who actually have a genuine, like, mystical, spiritual life have gone through a season where they've lost their concept of God, like they've lost their worldview. You know, whenever, so I'm going to point back to the time where I was like mired in addiction that came after I was 100% like in on this relationship where I was in love with this girl and had these like beautiful mountaintop experiences where I felt like God was sort of like pushing us into relationship. And it was like, if this was not God speaking to me, then none of the other times in my life could have been God speaking to me, or I have to examine all of them. Basically, the relationship fell apart, and I ended up with this like anxiety disorder and depressive disorder that made me actually psychotic, and I was in like therapy and unable to sleep for like 6 months, literally. And anyway, it was hell. It was like living hell. And during that time, I was like, completely stripped of God. Like everything that I believed about God or like understood about God was just gone. And I remember like, so I'm still a worship leader and a youth minister at this time.
Wow.
Like playing music for mass and like literally having panic attacks and having to go and like throw up in the bathroom, like coming back and like leading the next song, you know? And going home and just watching Christopher Hitchens or like Sam Harris and having these big fights with my dad about whether or not God existed, and just a lot of anger around it, you know. But point is, there were these moments during that where I remember going to confession maybe like 3 months after, just because I had so much pain in me. And I was like, I don't really believe in this, but like, I just need to talk. I went into this chapel. I did confession and went into this chapel, and I was alone afterwards. And I felt like I was floating. Like there was this sense of something actually like picking me up. I felt dizzy, like I was like looking down above the world on my own body. I just felt like there was compassion for me, not just like I had compassion for me, but like the universe had compassion for me, like in my suffering. Like there was something seen and understood about it. Anyway, I don't think that I really had a really genuine like understanding of God until I was able to say like, I don't really know who he is, and had that stripped. Like there was this sense of that was a necessary part of my own spiritual walk and spiritual journey. And I'm just wondering, like, huh?
I think that's totally true. And I think that that's what it is. It becomes, you know, it's everyone else's faith, but it's just like an academic level for you until you do kind of strip it down to the studs and say, okay, what do I know to be true? Like I said, this one exercise from my sponsor really forced me to look at like, what do I believe in the spiritual realm? And I do think having trauma and hurt and being angry at God, you know, anger is a passionate emotion. And could have saved him. Like I have had so many men leave me in my life. My brother was the one man who was never going to be able to leave. Like it was me and him. And when he died in this car accident, I would go and I would just drink down at the tree that he hit. It was this very morbid ritual I would do. So I would sit out there on scalding hot days and drink and get sunburned. And one night I drank, drove my car out to the tree, and it was storming. And so I just remember like sitting next to it and just crying out and being so mad and saying like, why did you let this happen? Like, do you not know how bad this hurts? Like it was affecting every aspect of my life. Happened 3 weeks before my wedding. Like we ended up calling the wedding off. Like it ruined so much. And I look back and it gave me kind of a dysfunctional marriage in the beginning because I was not in a right mindset for years after this. And so I just remember this day though, it was the evening, like sitting out there and just telling God to fuck off. Like I was so angry. I don't think I have ever felt that close to God. Like in that moment, it was storming so hard on me. And I just felt him say like, I was there for all of it too, because that was the thing. My brother was the witness to my life. So all the trauma we experienced, like growing up, we did not have a great childhood. And this was the only other person on the earth who understood it from my perspective. Like he was the witness to my life. And now that he was gone, how did I know if those things even really happened? Like I didn't have someone to validate them and verify them. And feeling God's sadness is what it felt like, you know, I'm being super dramatic, but no, being in the rain.
Dramatic at all. Like
as I'm sitting there with tears streaming down my face and the rain is just like streaming down my face too. And realizing like God was the only other entity, you know, spirit that also was there through my whole life and can validate those things and does know how hard it's been in those experiences. And so I actually look back on that and think that was a really beautiful time, like in my kind of faith journey. And I think that's probably the reason that I haven't gone full atheist, because I do have a sense that there's something trying to communicate with me on that spirit level.
Right. And that in a lot of ways, like where you are right now is probably similar, like a similar place of being stripped, and you're being given like new purpose, but there's been a lot of stripping that's been a part of that, like that gift, you know? I mean, I remember, so part of, to riff off of like what the story that you shared, like one of the more climactic moments that led to was I was here back at my house for Easter, and I'm still in this mode of like chronic anxiety. And until now, I'd like always sort of thought about people with anxiety disorders as being like, just shut up and get over it. You know, that was like my response to it. But I realized, you know, when it happened to me, that like there's actually this physiological feedback loop that you hit where your body is in a place of like such sort of like physical anxiety. It's like built into your nervous system that your brain starts to like respond to everything, all of the signals that are coming to it, and reinterpret them through like anxiety. So it's like living in a horror film, even though there's nothing wrong. And anyway, I would like my entire neck and back was like in a constant sort of, it was always, I don't know, what do you call it when it's like jerking? Yeah. And I'm in the place where like there's the most triggering, I guess it's the most triggering place to be is church for me when I was going through that, because I'm like, I don't believe in anything, you know, I'm looking down the void. And there was a moment where I kind of like had to decide like I'm going to stay alive. It was like the week before, and you know, there's a lot of things leading up to that. But while I was there, it was the the Holy Thursday service where they're reenacting the washing of the feet, and then Christ's prayer at the Garden of Gethsemane, where he's like, you know, let this cup pass by me. And I had all of this sort of anger at God, like, why did you let this happen to me, you know? But at the same time, it was a lot of things clicked for me, because I'm sitting there and I'm like, this guy who's going through this, like this prayer where he's saying like, let this cup pass from me, like he's the only person here that can understand like what I'm going through. And there's just this sense of like, you know what, even if I have to live the rest of my life like this, with this disorder and like alone and single, at least there's like somebody who understands that. And I just like walked outside and started like, I put on some ambient music and just started dancing, sort of in this garden. And I was like, this is my Garden of Gethsemane. Like I'm accepting the cup of feeling like misunderstood by everyone else, because I feel like there's compassion here for me. And the reason why I just like want to get into it and talk about it is because I feel like so many people feel afraid to walk into the darkness of like not knowing, and not like of being agnostic, you know, of like having their worldview stripped away from them. It doesn't always happen because of like a thing that you can control, you know, like it just happens to you. And if that's the case, then there's this fear of like, okay, what am I going to do now? Like, what am I going to pitch myself on? And I believe that God is real enough to sort of like coast through that with you, you know, like there's this process of him just sort of walking with people in the middle of the doubt, and like teaching new things to them about himself, like all of the false things being taken away and being able to use it, you know? So I'm wondering if you've had any like spiritual moments since then, since the stripping, that have been really like powerful. I don't know, I guess like this is more real God.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the things, I've got this friend, he's a lawyer up in DC, and I had mentioned something about IJM, which is International Justice Ministries or missions, and basically they work with human trafficking, and they were doing this really cool thing, and I'd sent it to this friend, and he's like, that's so weird. I'm at a luncheon right now for IJM and they're talking about it. And I'm like, okay, that's crazy. And so then the next week I went and had coffee with this woman. It was on like National Sex Trafficking Day. She used to work with IJM in the Philippines, pulling women out of sex trafficking. And I'm like, okay, again, like when you start seeing patterns like that, like something else is at foot, you know, like something else is going on. And so reached out to him, and we started this thing where we would like keep track of the IJM references. And the joke was, I think you're clearly supposed to do this, like not us, like not me. It's clearly you. You're the one who's supposed to like go over to Iraq and pull girls out of sex trafficking camps with ISIS and stuff. And so at one point, like I remember being on the phone with him and saying, okay, this many coincidences, like this is crazy things going on. Like, is it like that Facebook thing where you say something out loud and then like all of a sudden it's in your ads, you know, is like that what's happening? And I literally hang up with him. My Instagram was open, and on the Instagram was this quote from Albert Einstein that said, coincidences are God's way of staying anonymous. And I was like, this is literally like a meta coincidence at this point. This is him. I don't even think he's really staying that anonymous anymore. And that's when I kind of started keeping track of coincidences in my life. You know, like some of them, yeah, probability wise, maybe they are just a coincidence, but so many other things I think are something trying to communicate with me in certain ways of like which path I'm supposed to go. Or, you know, I speak out a lot. I actually just posted a video on New Wave Feminist this morning talking about pregnancy resource centers. And there's this huge campaign calling them fake clinics right now. And, you know, saying we need to acknowledge our shortcomings. I don't think they're fake clinics, but they're community health centers. And this is something that is a very, I'm not calling myself bold, but it's a bold statement to make, because obviously it's going to tick off a lot of our followers who give their time and talents to these centers. And John Acuff actually has a funny thing that he does about like if you're playing one time and he was about to make fun of somebody and he went to tweet it and it kept like the tweet wouldn't go through. It kept shutting, the app kept shutting off. And he's like, okay, is God trying to censor me right now? Like to stop me from saying something I'm not supposed to? That happened in my life where I go to post something on New Wave Feminist and all of a sudden it doesn't go through. I posted something last week. It just said unpopular opinion. I don't think Roe v. Wade's going to be overturned. And then I went into the argument for why this needs to be fought on a cultural level with resources and help for women and not from a political level. And I had really long, and I went to post it and it froze up and the app shut down. And I was like, damn it, like, I guess I wasn't supposed to, but I'm really stubborn. And I think, you know, my Mr. Miyagi God like knows this. And so I ended up rewriting the whole thing, and it was 10 times better. It answered some of the unanswered questions in the first post, and then it went through. And so, and it ended up kind of going viral on our page. And so like, it's so stupid, but even listening for little things like that, I think are ways that I've been able to stay connected. And again, I think that for me, that is vital, because I do agree. Like, I think that there's so much fear with our generation, especially, of like leaving behind the known. And whether that's your political party, you know, I think so many of us feel like, well, if I leave this political party, I'm going to be powerless. Like, I'm not going to have this tribe anymore. But yet millennials at an astonishing rate are leaving institutions altogether. They're leaving churches and political parties and colleges. And so when we look at that, we have to say, okay, what is it? It's not just this individualism. It's this lack of consistency and honesty and authenticity that they're not finding in these institutions. And I remember going to Watermark a few years ago when I was having some major doubts, and I messaged a friend. It was about kind of gender roles in the Bible and how I didn't see them being punished in the way that I thought they should be. Like, if God truly cared about women, like, these things were just unacceptable to me. And so that kind of started unraveling this ball of doubts for me. And then I messaged a friend and I said I wanted to meet with Todd Wagner, the pastor there, because I was like, I think I obviously in the pro-life movement and am surrounded by Catholics. They're constantly trying to convert me. And so I had this friend who was like, well, you know, look at, and she started sharing some Pope John Paul stuff with me. And I'm like, okay, and then actually, you know, natural law and Humanae Vitae, is that the other one you'll have?
Yeah.
So some really beautiful writings about women and stuff. And I was like, shit, am I about to become Catholic? And so I sent this friend a message who was friends with Todd Wagner, and I said, I'm in dangerous waters right now. I might be about to become Catholic. You let Todd Wagner
That is so funny.
I would like to meet with them. And the response I got back, I don't think she realized she was probably not supposed to forward me the response from his assistant. But basically the assistant said, Todd doesn't meet privately with women. And given that the main, crux of this was how women are treated differently, I'm not trying to take Todd Wagner out to like an Italian bistro with like a candlelit dinner. Like women can be in the room. I don't care. I want to have a real conversation. And I was so frustrated by that. And they said, but we can have you meet with these leaders. And one of them was they've got a apologetics program called Great Questions that answers the really deep theological questions. And I remember I had gone to one of the sessions, and everybody in there was like, why does God hate gay people? And it was basically an hour of them undoing that lie in people's heads. And I thought, my big doubt, and I went and visited this friend, by the way, in that interim out in North Carolina. She set up a meeting with me and her priest. I walked in, the priest closed the door, walked me over and said, what's going on with you? Like, talk to me about this. And I'm like, we're in a private room together and he doesn't think I'm going to molest him. Like, this is, score for Catholicism. And he goes, why are you having these doubts? And I broke down just sobbing. And I said, because I have 4 kids and it's no longer me just playing fast and loose with my own soul. I have 4 other people. And if I'm leading them astray and teaching them the wrong thing, and it ends up leading to like eternal issues, like, I can't imagine that. I can't imagine not seeing them for the rest of my life. And by this theology, if they decide to reject this faith, they're going to spend eternity in hell, tormented and tortured. That is so much pressure for me as a mother. And to the point where I kind of understand the Andrea Yates type thinking of like, get your kids saved and kill them all so that you can spend eternity in paradise. Like, that would be the most selfless thing I could do, is take that on and spend my life in jail. And by this point, the priest is wild-eyed and like, oh my gosh, do I need to call CPS? And so I turned around, I'm like, I'm not going to do that. But I hate the fact that theologically that thought entered my head and kind of made sense for a minute, because I'm so afraid that my kids will reject that and I won't get to spend eternity with them. And that's why at this point, my husband and I joke that we haven't rebelled against the church. We've kind of Rob Belled against the church. And we're definitely reading a lot of Rob Bell and, this belief that maybe we've gotten it all wrong. Maybe we've taught tradition rather than actual scripture. And so at this point, I go back and I meet with the 2 women and the guy from the Great Questions thing, and he's checking his watch and kind of looking at his phone, totally ignoring me, because he thinks I'm going to ask why God hates gay people, or like one of these softball questions. And so as I start talking to the women, they're again being very surface level with like, well, is it dinosaurs or what is it that's like hanging you up in the Bible that you don't agree with? And I'm like, at one point I considered seminary. So I've gone through all basic theology. Like I know all that, like, no. And so then I start telling them about feeling like I need to kill my children to get them to heaven. And all of a sudden the guy perks up and he's like, wow. And I was like, I have a problem with this God that's supposed to have created me like as if I'm one of his children, just like my own children. I would never create a child just to destroy them. That's literally everything I am against when it comes to my pro-life activism. So I do not think that this God who truly loves me like a father could then send me into some pit of fire. And at the time I was more in the belief that maybe you just disappeared. You just went back into non-existence like you were before you existed. And I was okay with that one. I could accept that one if they would have been like, yes, Watermark allows for this thought process, And so this guy and I get into this room. Finally, he goes, I have a lot of the same doubts and I don't have the answers to this shit. And first of all, him saying shit won so many extra points with me because he's my type of personality. Mm-hmm. But then on top of it, him just saying, I don't know, that was huge. Like, how many faith leaders do that? Like, most of them will just talk in circles until you finally give up and you're like, all right, I'll keep believing in God for a while, But he didn't. And that was the authenticity I needed. And that's what I personally respond to. And so to this day, it's something where I haven't written off the Christian faith by any means. Like, I have so much respect for so many good people who believe it, and it motivates them to love others and do good. It makes me question the people who use it to hurt others and exclude people and make them feel less than, you know, based on their sexuality or politics or any of these other things. You know, I see it being used to dehumanize a lot. That's where I could no longer relate to the church. After the Trump election, and one of the pastors there came and did a Facebook Live explaining why he had to vote for Donald Trump. And as someone who's experienced sexual assault in the past, like, I took that as an affront to women. And even though we kind of knew that a lot of pastors voted that way, like, I didn't want to actually know it. And I didn't even realize till about 6 months later that we had just quit going to church, and we had always gone to church. And I look back and I'm like, wow, we quit around November. Oh, what else happened in November? And so I think at that point it became, if there is a God, he's going to have to pursue me. He's going to have to seek me out, because the church was not representing it well enough, in my opinion, that I wanted to be aligned with it anymore. I was having to compromise so much of who I believe I was created to be as an individual, who just loves people and cares for people. But then I had all these weird stipulations because of my faith, you know, like, oh yeah, well, you have to do a Pray the Gay Away type program if you're like this, or if you're, you know, an immigrant, well, you need to follow the laws, stuff like that. Like, got in the way of me loving people. And I had to leave the church behind because of that. But I think you're right. Like, maybe ultimately this will be like the most honest pursuit I've ever had of who is God and what is God to me, because I don't feel like he's angry at me. I don't feel like he's left me behind in any way. Like, I still feel that connection that I had the night I was standing there telling him to fuck off, you know, at my brother's tree. Like, I still feel that. And probably more now than I actually have for a long time being in institutional religion. Yeah.
There's something that's like a consistent part of your story, which is like being willing to, to step outside of a bound, like step outside of a box, step outside of like a tribe, and to be different, but to be consistent, like with yourself. And there's something, one, like really prophetic about that. In that, like, you're willing to witness to something that other people aren't able to see, but to like take the risk of like living in a way that other people perhaps would not, like in a way that's scary, that could risk rejection, risk like not being squarely in what's acceptable.
But like, you're someone of faith, so you get this on a different level too, that I am in a leadership position. And so that's why I don't talk about my faith at all, because the last thing I want to do is kill God for somebody else. Like, I don't know what their journey is, and I'm not trying to like glorify atheism or agnosticism in any way. Like, I do feel responsibility as a leader. And so that's why, aside from this podcast, like, I really don't talk about my spirituality at all.
Yeah. I mean, it's a scary thing, right? But like, what about all of the people who are there in the shoes of destiny? Like, oh shit, God doesn't exist, but like, I'm still like, you know, I don't know. I like, that was me, in 2013. And I just want people like who have experienced that to feel like it's okay to be there, and not to feel like cut off from me or from like this community or from God, just because like their worldview is sort of pulled out from under them. And anyway, I think it's important for people to like know that leaders also like have these things, and not feel like, okay, they're heroes that just don't doubt and like have always been strong and whatever, you know what I mean? Like, that feels so isolating. So I'm grateful for you being willing to talk about it on the podcast and be honest with like you being in the midst of it, not just like talking about it like, oh, this is something I went through back in the day. Like, you know what I mean? So.
No, yeah, I'm straight up in it. And I appreciate you letting me be a part of Catholic Creatives, even though I'm not Catholic and I'm only slightly creative. So.
You're a founding member, Destiny. There's like, I don't know, ever since we worked together on the blogging project and you told everybody that they should let their kids cuss.
Which I've taken back completely. Totally taken it back. Now that I have a sailor for a daughter, do not let your kids cuss.
Yeah, I've always seen like your willingness to be different as something that like, one, I want to be I want to be friends with in my own life because it calls me on, but two, like, I just want you to be successful and support you in whatever that you're doing. And part of that is like, I want to be an accompaniment for you in the journey of doubt and of like, I don't know, just the hardship of that.
You just want to make me Catholic. Let's be honest.
I've always believed that you really are Catholic deep down, and that I don't have to make you. It's just sort of like part of where you're going to end up.
I'm going to show you what I have on my wall behind me, which the can't hear. Do you see this?
Yeah.
That I bought in New York. It's this huge graffiti art piece that was so badass. I bought on the streets of New York. I totally thought it was Mary because that's where my Catholicism tops out, is like, if you have a halo thing and you're a lady, you're probably Mary. And I took a picture of my son in front of it the other day. He was doing something goofy. And somebody goes, "Oh, that's Philomena."
Yeah.
And so then I started looking into Saint Philomena and everything that she went through, that she had promised to be chaste. And then this king or powerful man had basically said, like, "No, you're going to marry me." And he, you know, kind of this forced child bride thing happened. And so she was tortured and shot with arrows, and they tied a stone around her and threw her into a river or something, tried to drown her, and angels kept saving her the whole time. Finally, he decapitated her, and she died on my birthday.
Whoa.
Which I was like, yeah. So I was like, all right, if you guys ever rope me in, she would probably be my saint. She's pretty cool.
She can still be your saint. You don't have to get roped all the way into like,
cool.
About it. Yeah. This is the thing about Catholicism, man. It's a big boat. It's a really big boat. And you're definitely welcome in it. So thanks for jumping in on the podcast and just being real, because
Thanks so much for having me.
There's a lot more realness that I think our whole sort of community and culture needs to be like encouraged to and given permission to be. So
Amen.
Thanks for living a life that gives all of us permission to like be ourselves.
Thanks, friend.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. I'm going to stop recording.